Good evening. Good evening. And welcome to the April Lyceum. For those who, most people know me, but if you don't, my name is David Nelson. And along with Carol Whittier and Carl Donnelly, we form the Lyceum Committee and organize and prepare these lectures. I'm going to skip over tonight's presenter for just a moment, come back to him, talk about the May Lyceum. And our presenter will be Alex Gondola, and he will be back to talk about the history of the Andover Newton Theological Seminary, which was founded in 1807, and it's the first graduate school of any kind in America. I didn't know that. Plus, its faculty and graduates include numerous figures who were important in American history. And additionally, the Andover branch of this school was founded by congregationalists from our tradition. Several of our ministers are graduates, including Pastor Al White, our pastor, and Alex himself. And I'm sure a search of the historical room will uncover even more. That will be on May 14th. In June, the presenter will be Ross Whittier. He'll be back to give us another travelogue. This time it will be Ireland, the Emerald Isle. Everyone's familiar with Ireland, even if we haven't visited. But is Ireland really like all those things that seem so familiar? And so come and join us as we explore a bit of Ireland, and perhaps you'll find some surprises among the familiar. In July, there's no Lyceum. In August, there's no Lyceum. So now, tonight, our program is about Alexander Graham Bell. While he's best known for the invention of the first practical telephone, he has many other accomplishments that remain unknown to most people, including inventions, research on hearing and speech, optical communications, hydrofoils, and aeronautics. So would you please welcome Alexander Graham Bell.
Yeah, good evening. So I've been away for quite some time. And we'll see if you can hear me okay.
Yes.
So, like I said, I've been away for quite some time. In fact, Dave Nelson came up to Nova Scotia the other day and found me. I'd been buried up there in 1922. So he found me and brought me back. I've got my program printed out because I don't remember all the details anymore. So I've got information about my parents, my wife, very little about the children. You can read that on Wikipedia yourself. And that's another term I learned from Dave on the way down, Wikipedia. And I don't know much about that. And but he also showed me something else on the way down. He gave me this device, and he asked me if I wanted an Apple, an Android, or Galaxy. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, where are the wires and all the batteries? I mean, that's what telephones are, right? You have to have a battery, you have to have wires and all that. And he says, no, it runs on something called cell towers. And I have no idea what he's talking about. Then he talked about Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and I said, you're going to have to tell me about that later. Maybe Scott can do that later. So again, I'm happy to be here, and we'll start our program right now. As you can see, there is a family resemblance.
Mostly the eyes.
It's the eyes. I think the nose too, perhaps, just a little bit. So I just want to remind you a little bit about myself, Alexander Graham Bell. I didn't have a middle name of Graham until much later in life, and I begged my parents to give me a middle name, so they gave me Graham. And if you're a family, you could call me Alec. And we spell that either A-L-E-C or A-L-E-C-K. But you're not family, so please call me Alexander. Right? Born in March of 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland. And like I said, I passed away in 1922 at a good age of 75. And buried up in Nova Scotia. And that's where Dave came and got me the other day. So thank you very much, Dave Nelson. Citizenship, very interesting. My original citizenship was United Kingdom, and then British subject in Canada, starting in 1870, and then naturalized U.S. citizen in 1882 until my death in 1922. I want you to take a good look at my parents, Alexander Melville Bell, and his wife, Eliza Grace Simmons. And then you see a picture of myself and my wife, Mabel Hubbard. We were married in 1877 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I bet you didn't know that. Also, I had a rich experience teaching and working with Helen Keller. And she had, I had a deep fascination with voice and deafness. And I made a pocket watch chime so that she could actually feel the vibrations as it went through different times of the day, typically on the hour and half hour. And as an inventor, I enabled the young child to receive an education, including her groundbreaking college education. Now, my mother, Eliza Simmons, was a remarkable woman who overcame her deafness to become an accomplished musician and painter. She was born in September of 1809 in Fortin, Hampshire, England, and died January of 1897 at age 87. There were 3 children, Melville, Edward, and of course Alexander, myself. Eliza Simmons was born, like I said, in September of 1809 in Hampshire, England. She was a daughter of a naval officer. She grew up in a cultured and educated family and showed an early interest in music and art. At the age of 12, she contracted scarlet fever. I think we've heard of friends and family who have had that in the early years, which left her partially deaf. Despite this setback, she continued to pursue her passions and learned to play the pianoforte and the harp. In 1843, she married myself, Alexander, a professor of elocution and phonetics who had developed a system called, I'm sorry, my father, not me. Being away so long, this is new to me. And my father was a professor of elocution and phonics and developed a system of what we call visual speech, which I'll get into a little bit later on. And it was for teaching the deaf. They also had 3 sons, like I said, Melvin, Alexander, and Edward. She was a devoted mother who encouraged her sons' intellectual curiosity and creativity. She taught them to read at an early age and exposed them to various subjects such as literature, science, history, and many languages. She also supported their musical interests and often played duets with them on the piano or on the harp. Her deafness worsened over time, but she never let it hinder her communications or her social life. She learned to lip read in several languages and became fluent in French. She also maintained an active correspondence with her friends and relatives. She became incredibly close to her son Alexander Graham Bell, myself, who shared her love for music and art. Alexander, myself, inherited his father's interest in speech and sound. He became fascinated by the idea of transmitting speech over wires after seeing a demonstration of an electric telegraph, which was used all over the world. But it was not an audible, it was just clicks, like Morse code type of sounds. He also wanted to help his mother communicate better with others. He experimented with various devices, tuning forks, magnets, batteries, reeds, membranes, needles, etc., until he finally invented the telephone in 1876. And I'll get into a little more detail, show you some pictures of my device. She was one of the first people to hear her son's voice over his new invention, the telephone. She was amazed by the breakthrough and proud of his achievement. She later wrote to him, "I'm so happy that you've been able to give voice to those who can't speak." She lived long enough to see her son become famous for his invention. She also witnessed him marry Mabel Hubbard, another deaf woman he taught visible speech. She died, like I said before, in 1897 in Washington, D.C. at an age of 87, and she's buried next to her husband at Rock River Cemetery. Her tombstone bears an inscription that reads, "In memory of Eliza Grace Simmons Bell, wife, mother, friend." She was an extraordinary woman who overcame adversity with grace and dignity. She inspired her son Alexander, myself, with her courage and love. She left behind a legacy of artistry and innovation that still resonates today. So you need to know a little about my father, Alexander Melville Bell, born in March of 1819 in Edinburgh, Scotland, passed away in August of 1905 at age 85. He was a teacher and researcher of phonetics and was the author of numerous works on orthography and elocution. He was also the inventor of what I'll talk about, visual speech. In 1868 and again in 1870 and 71, he lectured at the Lowell Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, after having moved to Canada. In 1870, he became a lecturer of philosophy at Queen's College in Kingston, Ontario. In 1881, he moved to Washington, D.C. at the suggestion of me, his son, where he devoted himself to the education of the deaf by use of, again, visual speech, in which the alphabetical characters of the linguistic invention were represented by graphic diagrams for the various positions and motions of the lips, tongue, mouth, etc., as well as other methods of orthography. Prior to departing for Scotland for Canada, Melville Bell had published at least 17 works on proper speech, stenography, and others. Besides instructing at Queen's College, he also lectured in Boston, Montreal, Toronto, London, and other universities, including a series of 12 lectures at Boston's Lowell Institute. He became a Fellow of the Educational Institute of Scotland, the Royal Scottish Society of Arts, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as obtaining memberships in other societies. So just a quick repeat of visual speech, and like my mother and grandmother would say, there will be a test afterwards. And I think that's how she got us to remember things. So I'll ask you later a little bit about visual speech. He published his works on visual speech to help the deaf-born both learn and improve upon their aerial speech, since the profoundly deaf could themselves not hear their own pronunciations. To promote the language, Bell created 2 written short forms using his system of 25 modifiers and tones, 52 consonants, 36 vowels, and a dozen diphthongs. World English, which was similar to the International Phonetic Alphabet, was also used in line writing, and now it has been used as a shorthand form for stenographers. His works on visual speech became highly notable and sometimes were thought of as even of greater importance than the invention of the telephone. Melville saw numerous applications for his invention, including its worldwide use as a universal language. One thing, however, it was somewhat cumbersome to use and to explain to others, and it kind of faded out of use over time. So, you need to know a little about my wife, Mabel Gardner Hubbard, and she requested that Alexander use the name Alec. And like I said before, please use Alexander. She was an American businesswoman and the daughter of a Boston lawyer, Gardner Hubbard, born in November of 1857 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she died in January of 1923, 1 year after I did, at age 65. Children: Elsie, Marion, Edward, and Robert, who both died at childbirth. Her hearing, which had been destroyed by scarlet fever close to her 5th birthday, left her completely deaf for the remainder of her life. Mabel learned to both talk and lip read with great skill in multiple languages. She was also, due to a great part of her parents' efforts, one of the few first deaf children in the nation to be taught both lip read and speak, which allowed her to integrate herself easily and almost completely within the hearing world, an event virtually unknown to those of the deaf community at that time. Described as strong and self-assured, Hubbard became one of Bell's pupils at his new school for the deaf, and later involved into his confidant. They married on July of 1877 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Now, I get to talk about myself, all right? So, let's start. My alma mater was the University of Edinburgh in London. My occupations can be listed as inventor, scientist, engineer, professor, teacher of the deaf. I'm known for the invention of the telephone, co-founder of the Bell Telephone Company, and of Bell Canada and AT&T, which we all know. I was a very happy recipient of these lifetime awards, the Volta Prize in 1880, membership in the NAS, which is the National Academy of Sciences, 1883, the Elbert Medal in 1902, John Fritz Medal in 1907, and another 3, the Elliott Presson Medal in 1912, Hughes Medal in 1913, and the AIEE Edison Medal in 1914, which was 8 years before my death. Bell's father, grandfather, and brother had all been associated with work on elocution and speech, and both his mother and wife were deaf, profoundly influencing Bell's life's work. Bell's research on hearing and speech further led him to experiment with hearing devices, which eventually culminated in his being awarded the first U.S. patent for the telephone in 1876. Now, one thing interesting, I considered this invention a terrible intrusion into my work. And as a scientist, I refused to have a telephone in my office. It just wasn't good for my job and my work. This may interest you. Beyond his work in engineering, Bell had a deep interest in the emerging science of heredity. His work in this area has been called the soundest and the most useful study of human heredity proposed in the 19th century of America. Bell's most notable contribution to basic science is a distinct invention. Another first, Bell had a strong influence on the National Geographic Society and its magazine. He served as its second president from 1898 to 1903. Now, here are some early inventions. At age 12, I was able to build a homemade device for dehusking. It was put into use at the local mill and used for many years. In return, his father gave me the run of the small workshop, so I could do all my fun things at that place. I mastered playing the piano with no formal training, and I had something that people called, I was mimicry and voice tricks akin to ventriloquism. So at family gatherings, I did quite a bit of entertaining with this trick. I learned manual finger language so I could sit at the side of my mother and tap out silently the conversations swirling around the family parlor. I also developed a technique in speaking in clear, modulated tones directly into my mother's forehead, whereby she could hear him with reasonable clarity. Bell's preoccupation with his mother's deafness led him to many studies in acoustics. Now, I've got something very fun to show you here. This is one of the first telephones that I invented in 1876. And I was conceived the idea of electronic speech while visiting my mom in Canada. You can see very clearly this cone here, made out of like tin or metal. There's wood, probably oak I used. There's brass fittings. And inside this little area here, we had two different kinds of mechanisms to convert speech into electrical current or voltage. The first one we used in here was a needle that was dipped in sulfuric acid and water. And that needle is attached to a little diaphragm inside of this back of the cone here that was made out of parchment paper, very thin metal. Today maybe we'd use a plastic or other things. So when you speak into the cone, you vibrated the piece of paper or tin, which vibrated the needle, which changed its dipping action into acid with water. And since that acid was conductive electricity, it modulated or changed the electrical current going out from wires attached to these little chrome brass posts. Then it went out across the room or across town. And at the other end, we had a receiver, which was like a speaker. Another method we had, instead of using an acid container with a little acid with water and a needle, we used a coil of wire with some magnetic steel in it, kind of like a little transformer, which you may be aware of. So when you called somebody on the early telephone, you picked it up and spoke quite loudly into the end. And our first experiments, of course, were across just a room in the laboratory. But other times we were able to get it to run 2.5 miles at our first chance and over 6 miles as we progressed with more voltage from our batteries that were connected to this system. You may remember this, the first words ever spoken by Alexander Graham Bell when he was working with Watson, Thomas Watson, his assistant. "Mr. Watson, come here, I need you. I want to see you." And that's because he spilled acid on himself. And of course, Watson came running in from across the room and said, "Alexander, I can hear you." And of course, he was very excited, right? Because his invention was starting to work. Now, this is where we learn about a little bit more about the telephone. And Alexander Graham Bell suggested using the word ahoy, the standard greeting. Oh, my word. That phone that, I don't know if Scott gave me this, or if it was Dave. I guess I should answer it, right? Ahoy! Ahoy! Who's there? Is that you, Watson? Oh, Watson's not alive. Oh, I'm sorry. Who is this? Oh, it's Scott. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So I'd like you to practice answering the phone with me. Right? So consider it's ringing. And what do you say? Ahoy! Ahoy! Did you like that? That's kind of nautical, don't you think? But that's what he thought would be the proper way to enunciate, answer the phone. So his rival, Thomas Edison, who worked with him over great distances, said, "You know, Alexander, I think hello would be a better way to do this." Despite the popularity of hello, Alexander Graham Bell, me, continued to use ahoy. So this next week when you get phone calls, I'd like you to use the word ahoy. And then tell me back what people say. Right? So again, we should thank Thomas Edison for introducing the word hello. Now, I've got many other inventions that you probably have never heard of. This one here was invented in 1879. It's called the audiometer, a device used to measure a person's hearing ability. And it's still used today, of course, in a much more modern way. So the telephone was invented, the audiometer was invented. And getting on to more exciting things, we took the telephone and we added a little mirror on the end of the device. Remember the little disc where you speak into it and it would vibrate, either with a transformer or a little bit of acid with water and a needle? Well, you can substitute the needle and the acid with a little mirror and a light, and as you speak into the phonophone, your voice vibrates and moves the mirror, which shines off in the distance and modulates that light beam. And then you have something called a selenium rectifier that converts the light back into sound for a speaker. And we were very excited about that, but it didn't work well outside, and it worked better in darker rooms. But again, I think that's pretty exciting, don't you? Now, another thing that we really worked on in our laboratory was the first metal detector in 1881. It was developed primarily to detect metal by an induction balance device. And we tried to locate a bullet lodged in the body of President James Garfield after his assassination attempt, although we failed to detect the bullet. But again, we were able to detect metal in other things. So we're pretty excited, and we got to continue to perfect this device over time. Not to be outdone by other inventions, with a team and myself, we invented the early iron lung, and it was called the vacuum jacket. So in 1881, we had these mechanisms that provided a jacket that would go around a person's chest, and then we had like little pumps to put pressure on the chest to help you breathe. And later it was perfected into what people know as a modern iron lung. So I think you're probably surprised at some of the things that Alexander Graham Bell and myself did. Not to be outdone again, I worked with Charles Sumner Tainter and Chester Bell. We developed the graphone, an improved sound recording device that used wax-coated cylinders instead of the Edison's tin foil cylinders. So these devices here were to more accurately record sound that we could play back at a later time. And you find these in different museums too, both the wax ones and the metal ones. In my spare time, starting in about 1898, I played with kites. And we had various different kinds. And we kept very good engineering notes, so we knew how everything worked. We put some of the kites on little pontoon boats or little outrigger boats. And I got to know how they worked with the air. So in 1908, I added an aileron to the early airplanes that allowed them to, the ailerons were mounted on the wings, either the front edge or the back edge, I can't remember, but allowed the plane to be more stable and be steered in the air. So I learned that from working with kites. Then we got excited about, could we add a kite type of a structure to a boat, to a motorized boat? And we're thinking that we could maybe have these ailerons and hydrofoils to allow this boat to take off like an airplane. We didn't perfect it, but we did work on adding the hydrofoils to motorized boats, which was pretty exciting for our time. In 1907, I played around with the three-legged towers, which you see over in use with tripods and many other stable platforms. We had a lot of fun working on those. The decibel. Who's heard of the decibel for sound? Some of you have, right? So Bell's name remained in the popular lexicon after his death. To honor the invention's contributions to acoustical science, the standard unit for the intensity of sound waves was called the bell in the 1920s. The decibel, 1/10 of a bell, is the most commonly used metric for measuring magnitude of sound and noise, and that's still very common today. So the decibel, named after Alexander Graham Bell. Now, when you get time, and maybe when Dave Nelson takes me back to Nova Scotia, he can drive me by the Alexander Graham Bell National Historic Site in Baddeck, Nova Scotia. And that's a museum. And inside that museum, which has a great view out into the harbor, you see a whole series of displays this young woman is looking at, describing all the different inventions that we have, the telephone, the ailerons, all the things. And it's very exciting to see that. In fact, Dave did bring me through that the other day. On one wall, we have a complete display of all the different versions of the telephone that I created, along with the help of my people. Because I like to invent things, but I didn't like to carry them out to commercialization. So I got something working, and I was very happy with that, pushed it aside, let someone else develop it into a saleable product. Then I would start a new project. Here's an example of one of the kites that I worked on. In the museum too, you'll see an airplane with the ailerons that I worked on developing by adding the idea developed by learning how to fly kites and adding ailerons to aircraft. Also, you'll see a boat, which is kind of odd looking. It's made out of wood, and we have the hydrofoils built into that. And yes, and I said, yes, I should say no. No, we never took off out of the water. But it was pretty exciting to get this boat up on the hydrofoils. There's a special room in the museum in Baddeck where you pay $10 more and you get a private 1-hour tour of some of his most private engineering manuals and books described by someone like this young woman here that described in great detail all the different things. We wore white gloves and it was really quite educational. So I would suggest when you have time, get up to Nova Scotia, up to Baddeck. That's it. I was hoping to have another half an hour to an hour of time, but I had a lot of trouble putting this together using some of the modern technology that you folks have today. But I'm very happy about the telephone and the modern connections to improving like a phonograph, the ailerons, we have kites, we have the three-legged tetrahedrons, and the iron lung, the metal detector, maybe a few other things that I've forgotten and haven't published, but I hope that you can see that, and I hope that you can come next week after Dave brings me back to Nova Scotia, and I'm just hoping we don't have trouble crossing the border.
Yeah.
Are you open to questions?
Yeah, any
All right,
questions?
so I have one.
Uh-oh.
Just one. At the very beginning, you talked about a number of awards
Yes.
presented to him. One of them was a British award for saving lives at sea. I was wondering what was the occasion that resulted in that award?
I'm not sure I have enough information on that. Let's take a look at that.
The Albert Medal.
British decoration awarded for acts of bravery. I don't have enough information to remember that.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'll leave that for homework for next time.
There's only so much that I could prepare for after Dave brought me down. Yes.
How did you manage your finances? Who financed you to all these events?
Well, you know, I didn't talk much about my wife. She did all the things I didn't want to do. She managed the home, the food, the cooking, the finances. She helped me with some of the watercraft that we had. I didn't bother to do any of those things. I have no idea how that worked. I got grants and monies, of course, but she took care of all that. Good question.
Thank you, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I really appreciate you coming, and I look forward to going back home to get some more rest.